With training camp kicking off officially on Thursday, what are the biggest camp battles that I'm watching?
You're Locked On Sharks, your daily podcast on the San Jose Sharks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to Locked On Sharks, the premier hockey podcast covering your favorite team in the Bay Area. My name is JD Young, caretaker at the Reef, also the co-host of Western Conference Tuesdays on the Locked On NHL channel. I want to thank you for making Locked On Sharks your first listen, proudly part of the Locked On Network. We cover your team every day. And if you want to be an everydayer, all you have to do is just follow wherever you get podcasts, or you can watch on YouTube as well. And today we're going to be discussing some of the biggest camp battles that I'm watching for, including can Thomas Bordeleau make the team? Who gets to play with Macklin Celebrini? How does the middle or the bottom six get sorted out? And can Shakir Mukhamadullin claim a roster spot when it comes to opening night? So before we get to all that, do want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So, training camp officially, so Wednesday's media day. Training camp starts in earnest on Thursday with the first preseason game on Sunday against the Vegas Golden Knights. And as with training camp, where there's always going to be intriguing stories, and I know one of the big stories kind of heading into camp, at least coming out of the rookie camp, is can Quentin Musty make the roster? And we'll have plenty of time to kind of talk about that, but I wanted to talk about some of the kind of more impactful ones for some of these other guys, because if Quentin Musty doesn't make it, like, he's going to just go back and play in the OHL, and we'll see Quentin Musty next year. Like, it's not a big deal. But some of these other ones, including like Thomas Bordeleau, or who does Celebrini play, and can Shakir Mukhamadullin, these are going to be kind of big stories for the entire season because of kind of where these guys end up. Does Bordeleau end up playing with the Barracuda all season? Does he come up? Who plays with Celebrini? Is a rotating cast? Do we see the Will Smith Celebrini pairing together at some point? And defensively, there's just a lot of names there. And how does Mike Grier and Ryan Warsofsky kind of sort through all these guys to try to put together a lineup? But at the same time, you want to see Shakir Mukhamadullin in your opening night roster or playing NHL games this season. So let's start with Bordeleau, who I think is one of the most intriguing guys because he feels very much the bubbliest of bubble players for the Sharks. You could easily talk me into him being in the roster. You could easily talk to me into him being on the Barracuda. Like, I can, I kind of flip-flop where I think he's going to be just from moment to moment and every time I think about it. So Bordeleau, who ended last year pretty well with the Sharks, right? He scored in 27 games with San Jose last year. He had 6 goals and 5 assists. I know we got a couple games at the beginning of the season, but then played down the stretch, basically kind of on the third line, got a lot of power play time with the Lund Line. It was basically the Lunds, Bordeleau, and then Addison or Thrun kind of running the power play from a defensive point. But, I think for Bordeleau, he looked better playing in the NHL than playing with the Barracuda. I watched most of the Barracuda games last season, and Bordeleau in the NHL just was a better player than what you saw from Bordeleau in the NHL or in the AHL. And I think for him playing on the third line, where he's kind of playing, that energy scoring role with the Sharks last year, I think he made kind of the most of his opportunities during that time. The problem is he's not going to be afforded the same opportunities this season because of the talent the Sharks have brought in, right? You have Will Smith and Macklin Celebrini, who are dynamic top 5 picks, one of them being the first overall pick in Macklin Celebrini. You went out and you signed Tyler Toffoli, who is a walking 25 to 30 goal scorer. There's just not going to be the same opportunities for Bordeleau on this team. So what does Bordeleau do to kind of help make this team? And I think there are some areas where I think he can contribute. Like Bordeleau is not going to be a shutdown defensive player. He's not going to be known for that part of the ice, but Bordeleau was really good in the dot last year. And I know he's not going to be a center this upcoming, like I think the days of Thomas Bordeleau being a center are kind of done, especially with the players that the Sharks have brought in, not even including Alex Wenberg. And if Logan Couture ever returns, like there's just not a space, I think, for Bordeleau to be a center. But that doesn't mean he can't take faceoffs. And Bordeleau was actually the third best player when it comes to percentage wise on faceoffs last year. That's Nico Sturm was number one. Of course, we can know Nico Sturm's one of the best faceoff men in the NHL. Tomas Hertl, dearly beloved, was number two. And then Thomas Bordeleau was number three. Those were the only three players who took faceoffs last season for the Sharks who had above a 50% faceoff percentage. And I've said it before in this podcast, I'm not the biggest face-off dude. Like, over time, those things are going to even out. Yes, there are critical face-offs, like when you're down by one with like a minute left in your own offensive zone and you need a face-off. Like, yes, those face-offs are important. But throughout the game, like, I think face-offs can be overblown, just kind of that stat. But it's good to see a young player like Bordeleau maybe carve out that type of role where he can come in on the faceoffs, win faceoffs regularly, and then kind of slide back to playing his wing position. So that could be a bit of a role for him. And I think for him, his path to making this team is playing that third line energy guy where he needs to work on being just like every shift compete. And I know that has been a bit of an issue with him, is especially on back checking and kind of playing his own zone. That has been something I know that the coaching staff has gotten on him about, is not playing that full like 200-foot game. But can Bordeleau be a really solid, kind of energy guy? He's not going to be the most physical guy, but I think he does try hard. Help out with the draws, and then play on the second unit power play. I just, with the names in front of him, I don't expect him to kind of get those big power play minutes that we saw him getting last year. But I still think with his team that he could get some power play time, and maybe if a guy on the top unit isn't performing, he could be one of those guys who slides up into the first unit power play. I think we're going to see a much different unit than what we saw last year with the Lund Line plus whomever defenseman. I think you're going to see a much more dynamic, especially centered around Macklin Celebrini and Will Smith, or maybe they want to separate Celebrini and Smith because you don't want the two kids on the ice at the same time. But we'll talk about those guys here in a little bit more. But I think, though, for Bordeleau, this is a big camp for him. He's still waivers exempt. Even though he signed his new deal, he's still waivers exempt. So that's going to be a big decision for the Sharks, as they do have, some guys who are waivers exempt, right? You do have Eklund, who's still on his ELC, but Eklund has established himself as an every night NHL player. Will Smith and Macklin Celebrini are both also waivers exempt, of course, since they're on their ELCs, but you don't really expect those guys to be. I think Celebrini is as much of a lock to be on the team as just about anybody. And I think Will Smith would have to have a disastrous training camp for him to not make the team out of the opening nights. So I'm very much expecting those two guys to be on the team. And how does Bordeleau work his way into a much deeper forward group is going to be one of the biggest stories. My pre-training camp kind of battle or expectation is, I think Bordeleau starts with the Barracuda, but I think he gets a call up before the end of the calendar year, a permanent call up to the NHL by the end of the calendar year. So I just think the numbers are kind of not in his favor. someone gets hurt, someone gets traded, et cetera, opens up a spot for him. And maybe he goes down the Barracuda and just kind of makes it difficult for them to not bring him up. So that's my kind of that's his story is one of the biggest ones I'm watching this preseason. So we'll discuss who plays with Celebrini, trying to figure out who's in the bottom six, and if Shakir Mukhamadullin can claim a spot. So we'll get to that here in just 1 second. If you want to go catch games to the Sharks, who are starting here really soon, go catch a baseball game before the season is over. Go watch an NFL game. Whatever it is you want to get tickets for, you need to check out Game Time. Game Time is a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. They have curated deals that make it easier to find the best price on great seats. You can, of course, see your seats before you purchase. Nothing worse than getting to an event and realizing my seats stink. So check out Game Time. They got you covered. They take all the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL, LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, let's talk about Celebrini. So one of the other interesting things I think is who plays with Macklin Celebrini, right? And does Ryan Warsofsky split up the Lund line? I think these two kind of go hand in hand. We know Mikael Granlund, Fabian Zetterlund, and William Eklund performed beautifully together at the end of the last season. Was kind of one of the joys of watching the Sharks down the stretch is watching those three guys play together, especially with their play styles, right? Granlund kind of being a little bit more defensively responsible, being a facilitator. Zetterlund kind of the like junkyard dog for checking machine, and then Eklund as the playmaker. Those three guys had a really nice chemistry at the end of the season. Enter Macklin Celebrini. How are the Sharks going to kind of put him in a best position to succeed, right? And I wonder if splitting up the Lund line is something that they're going to look into. We know they signed Tyler Toffoli, and it feels like Tyler Toffoli and Celebrini are going to be linked together because Toffoli himself has talked about kind of being a mentor to Celebrini, and it would make sense just to pair those two together for on the ice and off the ice as well. But on the ice, their skill sets really work and mesh well together. Toffoli, who's a scorer, definitely works well off the rush. He's very good at kind of capitalizing off his opportunities, and is again a natural goal scorer. Celebrini, who we've seen his traits in college, his transition, we've saw it plenty of times in the rookie tournament. Again, rookie tournament, grain of salt, but we've seen his ability to create offense on the rush, control pucks. I think kind of control that middle lane. Those two guys, their skill sets seem like they would work really well together. If Celebrini's creating things on the rush, Toffoli's kind of hanging out, and he's the guy who's kind of taking advantage of all the opportunities that Celebrini's creating. Seems like a really good combo to me. Now, what do the Sharks do for that other side? You have Toffoli, who is a right-handed shot. Do they put Will Smith there, who's also a right-handed shot, and then you have two young players playing together? I would expect them to kind of separate those two just because you don't want to have two young guys on there more likely to have kind of maybe getting their lunch taken from them by more physical, bigger forwards or bigger defensemen. So I expect those two guys to be separated. Does Eklund, left-handed shot, go down to play with Celebrini and Toffoli? then maybe you kind of give up a little bit of size, as none of these guys are over 6 foot. Do you have maybe a guy like Clean Costin, who does provide some physicality with some scoring touch? Is he a potential option to play with Celebrini as well? Is Alex Wenberg an opportunity there where you could flank Celebrini with 2 veteran players in Wenberg and Toffoli? So that's one of the other big battles, is who earns that job next to Celebrini, and then therefore kind of who's playing with Granlund. So how the top 6, I think, really shake out is interesting. And we're going to see these guys mixed and matched all season long, but I'm curious to see what Ryan Warsofsky does off the bat for these players. So, and then I think that kind of naturally slides into the bottom 6, where Mike Grier went out of his way this offseason to try to put some more depth on this team, especially between the top 6 players, Granlund, Zetterlund, Eklund, Celebrini, Smith, maybe Toffoli, wanted to try to put some more depth between those guys and then your guys who you expect to be in the Barracuda, right? And that was a big problem with the Sharks last year, is all their center depth, which they thought was going to be kind of one of their strengths, was gone when Logan Couture only played 6 games. You lost Hurdle for a chunk of time and then traded him. Granlund was hurt at the beginning of the season. Sturm was hurt in the middle of the season. So you never really had all those guys together. And I think Grier did a much better job this offseason to go out and get some of these guys to help provide some depth in the bottom 6. So, who knows what happens with Couture? I'm going to assume until we see him on the ice doing stuff, I'm going to just assume we're not going to see him on the ice. But you have Barclay Goodrow, who you acquired by claiming him off from the New York Rangers. You have Luke Cunnin, Clean Costin, Nico Sturm, Carl Grundstrom, Ty Dellandrea, if Thomas Bordeleau, who can play, I think, that third line role that we just talked about. Wenberg, is he going to be your third line center? Where do all these guys, you have a lot of guys, and that doesn't even include some of the young players like Colin Graff, who I think is going to be most likely starting with a Barracuda, but could potentially work his way into the Sharks as well. Justin Bailey, Giovanni Smith, Scott Sabern, who's again going to be a Barracuda guy, but still wanted to kind of bring his name up as well. How do all these guys kind of fit in here? So you do have a lot of these same type of guys, and assuming if Granlund's your 1C right now, Celebrini's your 2C, Wenberg is maybe your 3C, and then you have Nico Sturm or Barclay Goodrow as your 4C, and then what wingers are going to be around them, right? Luke Cunnin, Ty Dellandrea, Grundstrom, Barclay Goodrow. You have a lot of these dudes with very similar skill sets, and you do have to kind of believe that a guy like Barclay Goodrow is going to be a lock to play night in, night out, especially for they talked very much about his intangibles and what he brings to the roster, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's going to be very much like Carl Grundstrom and Ty Dellandrea are going to be the 2 guys who I'm watching to kind of fighting for those last spots here, because Luke Cunning's probably gave Luke Cunnin a new contract this year at $2.75 million. You have Clem Costin, who I think played really well, maybe, was in the last year of his deal as well, but small sample size into the season. Is this one of those where the Jacob Peterson effect, where he got a bunch of playing time and took advantage of that, but then is it sustainable? So which of these guys really pop and kind of do their jobs, and who can play well on the penalty kill, and who is being a plus type of player? And I think that's where it's gonna be such a competitive training camp and preseason games for these guys to try to figure out who's on the team opening night, and who is sitting in the bench, and who might be potentially waived or traded to try to make room for some of these younger players here. So yeah, there's a lot of intriguing battles in this bottom six, which again I think is a much deeper and healthier bottom six than what we've seen in the past couple of years. I would still like to see a little bit more skill down there, but I think like if you did if you have Alex Wenberg as your 3C with like Clem Costin, and then maybe a Ty Dellandrea or Carl Grunstrom there, and then your fourth line is Goodrow and Nico Sturm, and then Luke Cunnin. Like that's not the worst that you've seen in the world. So yeah, it's going to be very intriguing how the Sharks try to fit all these bottom six pieces here. So that's kind of where I'm thinking it's going to be at. I could see, maybe Dellandrea, maybe they try to sneak him through waivers, or Carl Grunstrom. Both those guys would have a tiny cap hit on the Sharks, but it doesn't matter with their cap situation. Maybe they try to sneak him through waivers here and see if they can play that game, or maybe Justin Bailey continues to impress, or just there's a ton of guys here. Now I'm curious to see how they get utilized, who they play with, and kind of who gets that first crack at it. So we'll continue by looking at if Shakir Mukhamadullin can claim a spot in a kind of crowded defensive group, and where we're at with the defenders in the blue line here. So we'll talk about that here in just 1 second. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, now we've got something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5, get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. So if you're like me and my beloved Dolphins are, of course, out of market, I don't get to watch them on regular TV every week. With YouTube TV, I can watch the Dolphins every week, and I'm usually sometimes happy. A lot of disappointment in my life watching the Dolphins, but it has nothing to do with the quality of the stream. So with YouTube TV base, and you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday NFL or afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment. You can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, before we continue, of course, I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Sharks your first listen, probably part of the Locked On Network, where we cover your team every day. For your second listen, go check out one of the other great shows here at the Locked On Network. Of course, you have Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy, if you want to start getting ready for your fantasy drafts, Locked On Prospects, where here at the Sharks, of course, we love talking about prospects, so you can go check out those guys, or any of the other great shows here at the Locked On Network, especially in the Bay Area, right? Locked On Warriors, Locked On Niners, Locked On Giants, Locked On A's, got you covered for their seasons as well. So again, make sure you guys are following along wherever you get podcasts. And of course, you can watch on YouTube as well. So the blue line, I think, is a huge battle. You have a lot of veterans, right? Mark-Edward Vlasic, 2 years left on his deal. Jake Wallman, who you just acquired this offseason. Cody Ceci just acquired this offseason. Mario Ferraro, Jan Ruda, Matt Benning, Henry Thrun. That's 7 right there. And then, of course, you have Shakir Mukhamadullin, who the Sharks acquired in the Timo Meier trade. Last year had a really great season in the AHL. Unfortunately, it's ended a little early due to injuries, but you saw a lot of growth and development out of him. Did get a taste of NHL games. He played 3 games last year where he definitely did not look out of place. Mukhamadullin is viewed as one of the future kind of stalwarts on the blue line. He's 22, entering the last year of his ELC deal. So he's going to be around for a while. Like they own his rights, et cetera, et cetera. How do the Sharks balance these veteran guys with trying to work in some of these young guys like Henry Thrun and Shakir Mukhamadullin on a defensive core that was arguably the worst in the NHL last year, as we've talked about a bajillion times. Goal differential points from the defense. Like if you just this was a bad unit. So Ryan Warsofsky, hopefully new structure, new plan, new energy to this group. Maybe the new faces of Cody Ceci and Jake Wallman, who Cody Ceci and all of his warts, he's a professional NHL defenseman. He does have his strengths. I think his transition game is an underrated aspect. Maybe the offense isn't what you would like it to be, but I think Cody Ceci is a solid to decent defenseman. Jake Wallman, who should be the Sharks' power play 1 quarterback, if I'm kind of guessing right now, should provide a lot of offense. I know last year he faced a lot of tough assignments defensively, so maybe now with the Sharks, they can kind of share the load a little bit more with, kind of Mario Ferraro. I thought Vlasic had a solid second half to his season. I know he was dealing with some personal stuff at the beginning of the year. Where does like Wallman kind of like those guys are going to be in it? And then you have the veterans like Jan Ruda, who was kind of in and out of the lineup last year a little bit. You have Matt Benning, who's coming off a hip injury. Is he able to kind of get up to speed? So when do we see Mukhamadullin? I thought Mukhamadullin, especially last training camp and last preseason, there was a lot of buzz about him making the team out of camp last year, and he just missed, right? Is this the year where he finally makes it out of camp? And if he does, who kind of gets left behind? So Henry Thrun and Mukhamadullin are the only 2 players who are waivers exempt in that group. Do you maybe you look to trade, like if somebody's defenseman gets hurt in training camp or preseason or is not healthy at the beginning of the season, do you look to maybe move a guy like Matt Benning and Jan Ruda, who have a little bit smaller cap hits? Benning was really good 2 years ago before his injury, you could argue was one of the Sharks' better defensemen that season. Yes, they also had Erik Karlsson, which helps. But like Matt Benning, I thought was really, really good that season, kind of his first season in San Jose. Are you hoping he's able to get back from injury? If he's not, do you maybe send him down to the Barracuda where he can kind of slide under there and maybe try to get some games under his belt before you bringing him back up to the Sharks? Especially, again, you're coming off a hip injury where you missed the majority of last season. Like, how do the Sharks kind of navigate this defensive group? And if Mukhamadullin, if it's close, do you just give Mukhamadullin the benefit of the doubt and give him the edge, because you're going to want to see him play NHL games here sooner rather than later? He spent the entire season last year playing in the AHL. He's expected to be a big piece of your future. We know this team is not going to be the best team ever this year, and getting him playing NHL games, getting him kind of working through his rookie, issues might be a good time to do it. If you're going to have your rookie lumps, you might as well just kind of get them over with. So I think Mukhamadullin makes the team out of camp. And we might see some kind of, I don't want to call them shenanigans, but we might see some what we saw last year where guys are kind of put on IR for a little bit and then taken off. And then as soon as one guy comes off, another guy goes on. Like, you could potentially see that. And especially, with a guy like Matt Benning, who is coming off injury, and he sounds like he's ready to go, but maybe they're a little bit slow with him out of the gate. And that way they'll let him kind of get back up to speed. So, or like that's I'm very curious to see how they navigate this, because I think we want to see Shakir Mukhamadullin sooner rather than later. So we will be back tomorrow, because we're now back to 5 days a week, where we'll cover anything that from media day. We'll also talk about the actual training camp roster, as that was actually just released as I was recording this. So we'll get through that and get you ready for training camp. We have Sundays, our first preseason game. So plenty of good stuff coming here at Locked On Sharks. We cover your team every day. Make sure you're following wherever you get podcasts. And of course, you can watch on YouTube as well. Follow the show on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Locked On Sharks. Follow me on Twitter at MyFryHole. Till tomorrow. Bye, friends.